The first winter after the factory closed was the coldest anyone in Greystone could remember. Snow piled against the rusting gates where assembly lines had once hummed. Windows in the worker housing stared like empty sockets. When Mara Lockwood stepped outside her small sagging house one morning, she felt something like a question lodged in her chest. What next? The question was as sharp as the wind that day, but she had an answer in the shape of a single, stubborn belief. Moving forward mattered more than standing still. Mara had worked 30 years on the line, knuckles calloused, heart steady. The plant's sudden closure left a hollow in her routines and a thinner wallet at the same time. Her husband, Amos, had tried odd jobs, driving for a delivery service, stacking shelves, but his back protested and his optimism frayed. Their son, Jonah, had left for the city 3 years earlier and sent home thrift store furniture and occasional checks he never fully apologized for sending late. Pride kept him away as much as opportunity did. Neighbors pitched tents of rumor and despair. Some fled to bigger towns, chasing brighter signs. Others sank into bitter nostalgia, measuring days by the volume of what they had lost. But Mara moved through loss with her hands, not her words. She repaired what could be repaired. She taught herself new stitches on a dented sewing machine, turning moth-eaten coats into patchwork warmth. She joined the small gatherings at St. Bartholomew's Hall, where volunteers cooked soup and swapped ideas. At the meetings, she heard the word cooperative for the first time, people pooling labor and profit to rebuild a local industry. No one promised gold. They promised a morning with work to do and food to share. The cooperative took months to form. Paperwork, heated debates, compromises, the kind that scraped like stones, but eventually smoothed into paths. Mara found she liked the arguments that forced clarity, liked the quiet of late nights when the final details were drafted. Amos was skeptical. It felt like starting from zero. But when Mara proposed they renovate the old mill into a shared workshop, his hands remembered rhythm and steadied. He resurfaced an old table, sanded down a bench, and after a time, the small house filled with the scent of sawdust and something like hope. They began with what they knew. Durable, honest goods. Blankets. Rugs. Wooden tools, items that could survive a rough life. With Jonah in the city, sending weekly messages about a market that still valued craftsmanship, they opened an online listing. A neighbor with a battered laptop taught them how to take good photos. The first sales were modest. 3 blankets, 2 sets of wooden spoons. The revenue trickled in, but each sale felt like a small lamp kindled in the dark. Hardship, Mara learned, has a rhythm. Days of labor punctuated by the long silences of waiting. A blizzard could bury a delivery. A local buyer might delay payment. Sometimes money didn't arrive in time for rent. There were times Mara and Amos ate soup made mostly of water and whatever root vegetables were left. Yet within those difficult stretches, something important shifted. People began to depend on each other in a new way. The bakery owner, who owed them flour as barter, taught Amos to mend boots. A retired teacher created flyers and visited neighboring towns to drum up orders. The cooperative's meetings turned into planning sessions for community gardens, skill-sharing workshops, and tutoring for children whose parents were learning new trades. They stitched together a safety net from their frayed resources. Jonah returned one spring, restless and carrying a city-sized fatigue. He had been fired from a job that prized speed over care. He'd realized the city's bright lights often hid the same tired machinery that had closed in Greystone. Seeing the cooperative in motion surprised him, not because it was successful, but because it existed. The sight of neighbors laughing as they hauled bolts of fabric, of Amos teaching young men how to use a plane properly, of Mara negotiating a bulk wool order on the phone, brought something like humility to Jonah. He offered to help with marketing and packaging. His presence was not a fix, but a contribution, and the family welcomed it. Progress was never steady. A fire in the woodshop, caused by an old heater, set them back months. Insurance paperwork tangled like vines. Tempers flared. The group considered folding. Mara sat through that meeting and watched faces drain of energy. Then she stood and spoke in a voice that had long ago learned to carry both softness and steel. She reminded them of the hands that had stitched blankets for funerals, of the food shared at last winter's crisis, of the children learning to knot their first threads. "We've already survived the first fall," she said. "Now we decide whether we let it be the end or the reason we keep going." They rebuilt. The insurance money and small donations bought a used heater and better wiring. Volunteers cleaned, repainted, and installed shelves. Slowly, customers who remembered the region's craft traditions found them. A small magazine featured a story on cooperatives reviving Rust Belt towns. Orders began arriving from distant states and then from overseas. With each order, confidence grew. They hired apprentices, teens who wanted to learn rather than leave. The cooperative became a place of work, school, and sanctuary. Mara's relationship with sorrow also changed. She kept grief, the loss of steady pay, the sense of wasted years, as a quiet companion, not an enemy. On the nights she woke to the memory of the factory's last day, she would walk the lane to the mill and sit by the new kiln, watching embers like tiny worlds glowing. In those moments, she allowed herself to remember the pain without letting it define the future. From that practice came a remarkable clarity. Resilience was not the absence of suffering, but a willingness to build despite it. Years later, the cooperative had expanded into a modest complex of workshops, a small storefront, and a teaching room that hummed with the conversations of apprentices. They had diversified. Repair services, custom furniture, even a small cafe that used produce from the community garden. Greystone, once stagnant, became known for careful workmanship and a culture of mutual help. The town did not become wealthy overnight, and some families still left in search of other chances. But those who stayed learned to measure success differently, by meals shared, by trades passed down, by the way a neighbor's hand was always ready. Mara's hands grew slower with age. She could no longer work the heavy loom with the speed she once had, but she taught others how to feel the cloth, to see when a pattern wanted to shift, to trust their instincts. Apprentices looked to her not because she had all the answers, but because she showed how to carry on, how to set one foot ahead of the other, even when the ground was uncertain. On the cooperative's anniversary, the town held a small fair. Lanterns hung from the eaves, the scent of wood smoke braided with sweet pies. Mara walked through the crowd, felt the weight of a life that had been broken and mended, and heard laughter that sounded like a healed wound. Hardship, in the story of Greystone, was not an end, but a geography they had to traverse. Steps beyond it were small and practical: meeting rooms, repaired looms, online listings. But they were also moral, choosing collaboration over isolation, teaching over hoarding, persistence over resignation. If someone asked Mara what had carried them through, she would have said simply, the choice to keep going, to make and share, and to let the community be both shield and engine. It was not a heroic tale without suffering. It was an ordinary one of people who, day after day, stepped beyond hardship until the steps themselves became a road.